On the program today, we look at how the buildings and road infrastructure in Lusaka is progressing. Are they taking longer than expected? How is this happening in regards to faring well with businesses as well as residents along these roads and buildings that are being constructed? We also talk to Zipper as they advise policymakers from a follow-up that they have done recently in regards to Zambia's overall economic development. And Zambians are being used as fronts for owning businesses by foreign nationals. Christopher Yaluma, Minister of Commerce, Trade and Industry, recently said this in Parliament. We get details of this in the program. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Business Day, and my name is Judy Ngulube. We start off in the sector of infrastructure development. It's no secret that Lusaka, particularly in our country, has seen its fair share of road infrastructure as well as building infrastructure. If it's not an overhaul of the whole building or road, it's starting it from scratch or merely panel beating it here and there. But most people who are in the vicinity of these roads and buildings that are being worked on have complained of the duration as well as some inconvenience that is happening. But why are they talking about this? Are they looking at the bigger picture? We have a report for you to start the show. Infrastructure development is one of government's priority areas and is upheld in both the National Development Plan and the Vision 2030. Infrastructure development cuts across sectors and is unlimited. Zambia is currently having its share of this. Zeroing in into Lusaka, roads and buildings have either had an uplift or a complete overhaul. But as in every change, the process to the eventual result could be faced with some complaints. Some SMEs in the vicinity of the roads and buildings that are being constructed have complained that the duration of these constructions are taking long and has made them lose business. While some individuals say as much as they appreciate the works, some small but vital miscalculations have been noticed.
Kukonkhana mameti mavutikira manzi kuno kuchita vachita bwino manje tifuna ti ma-drainage especially paji vachita extend ni pang'ono maningi motoka ikanga kupita mugeti pamene vanakomba paja ni pang'ono maningi
Manje munadandaulika kuva area council vanhu ati ngati sivanapime sivanachite bwino kuona size.
Ninavaitana ine 2 times siwabwera vakambati nizabwera yesterday navaitana futi osabwera manje ava vamene vamanga vakambatise tikonkha mwamene anapima batise ma-resident tidandaula kuti vatikire bwino pa ma-bridge.
Business Day caught up with a development consultant, Augustine Mkandawire.
For a long time, one would say that infrastructure development was one of the biggest challenges to really achieving the desired economic development. Because as you are aware, that businesses follow where infrastructure is. So that includes roads, telecommunication networks, it could telecommunication towers, buildings, etc. But I think that looking at what Lusaka is going on now, I think it's a very positive thing, except that I'm sure that in every situation where such things come after the place has been developed and people have settled, it brings with it a lot of challenges. And I know that part of the problem that people will be talking about is basically talking about the dust, the disturbance in terms of movement of traffic, because certain roads get to be congested because other outlets have been closed. But I think that's a necessary thing, because in every situation, improvements always come with disruptions. But at the end of the day,
What do you say to those businesses that are saying the inconvenience is too much, it's taking long, you can only hold for so long?
well, I mean that the starting point is that they need to be a little bit patient, we know. I think the inconvenience always is there because road development or infrastructure development is not a one-day issue. But I think thereafter the place is going to look much more attractive and people are going to be happier to live in better places. And I think business will boom because everyone wants to spend time where places are attractive. But at the same time, I think that it's about also trying to re-strategize in terms of sales and marketing strategies that they use. And I think that now, especially for medium to large businesses. I think they need to also think about going online, except for small businesses that definitely need to have specific physical places. But I think it's a good thing. I know that always disruptions are part of change. Because status quo, things as long as they remain stable, nothing improves. But if there's disturbance, the disturbance gets to a point where you bring about improvement. So I think my request is that for a long time we've been talking about infrastructure development as a constraint to poverty alleviation, as a constraint to economic growth. And I think for once, government has come to the podium to try to improve urban infrastructure so that I think the capital city can look attractive. And those of you who travel abroad, I think will be happier to see your Lusaka city looking as beautiful. I know that alternative thinking would think about, why are we doing this in Lusaka? We could have been doing this in Chipata. But this is not about substitution. It's about what else should we be directing our efforts. So other than the efforts that government is paying to Lusaka, in terms of attractiveness of the city, beautifying the city, we need to be thinking about, well, when it comes to economic development, when it comes to agricultural development, when it comes to agricultural marketing, our farmers out there, what sort of effort, what kind of infrastructure do we need and how soon can we put it in place? So I think it has to be a balancing act.
When it comes to buildings, most people are talking about the only things that are coming up, or the majority of the buildings coming up, have to do with malls. They have to do with, multinationals coming through with their supermarkets, which is also hindering some of the local supermarkets that we have. In as much as we have these beautiful malls coming in, the locals cannot afford to actually be accommodated in those. Your comment on that?
I think that's where now government has to talk about regulation. Because I know for once, I think I've also heard around that I think the biggest challenge we're having now is that once these buildings or offices or malls are put in place, I think priority is given to foreign owners who are able to even pay the rentals in dollars, which definitely becomes a way of excluding the locals. And in the long run, if government doesn't think about seriously implementing policies or regulations around occupancy of this, definitely we're going to get to a disaster where locals are actually sidelined completely from undertaking business in their own country. So I think that the issue of malls is not a problem. The issue of office blocks is not a problem. But I think as we think about inclusive development, as we think about equity, even when we pursue economic development, what are those policy measures, administrative policies that we need to put in place to ensure that even in the business sector, which is primarily private, is regulated to the point that also it does run on the basis of equity.
Okay. How then could we say that infrastructure development is aiding economic growth?
Well, infrastructure development, ma'am, is capital investment. And I think in the books of Zambia, when we measure GDP growth, we know that part of it has to do with government spending. So overall, economists measure GDP growth, that's gross domestic, gross domestic product, through levels of consumption, through levels of investment, so it could be both domestic investment as well as foreign investment, through levels of government spending. So when you come to government spending, we're not talking about spending on Saturdays. We're talking about spending on what is called gross fixed formation, on fiscal infrastructure, okay, on roads, on buildings, on bridges, on telecommunication towers. And that itself, in the books of accounts, is reflected as part of the growth. Because also infrastructure, as you are aware, is what attracts investment. For example, Judy, you're here. I mean, we're talking about Zambia having abundant land, but the question would be, what kind of land is considered land for investment? It's not all land. Right now, I cannot go and invest in Chama because if I have to move with my children, if I have to move with my wife, I have to consider one, do they have good hospitals? What if I suffer from malaria? Am I going to evacuate? What kind of evacuate mechanism? Does it have to be a plane? Does it have to be a helicopter? So investors look at investment destination as a total package. They have to look at schools, they look at hospitals, they look at roads, water infrastructure, etc. So once you put these things in place, it means basically you're opening them up for further investment, and you're attracting investment there to promote employment opportunities. So that's good for development.
Widening roads, putting up buildings is displacing some of the trees that we have, some of the nature that we have in these same places. And sustainable development has to do with also taking into consideration the environment. Environment is really big when it comes to sustainable development now. Yeah. Is this being put into consideration?
Well, I think that within the concept of sustainable development goals, I think there is so much now thinking around green infrastructure. Okay, thinking about putting in place infrastructure that can withstand the floods, withstand the climate changes, but also at the same time ensuring that as we destroy the trees where the roads and buildings are, we have sort of other measures to ensure that we replant the trees, we make the surroundings green, because at the end of the day, there's sometimes compete. Development is about competition, because you open up land that was usually idle for land and for forests, but as you open up, you pave way for infrastructure. That infrastructure adds something. But I think that the question should be, what is it that we have to do? As we open up the city, should we be replanting trees? The president is talking about green, clean city. Lusaka has always been known to be a green city. It's because of the trees that we have. So one would hope that I think part of the measures as we open up these spaces, as we put up more malls, as we put up more office blocks, that I think part of the immediate measures is to always try to plant trees that can grow quickly and can provide the sort of substitution that we need.
A comment from the Ministry of Infrastructure and Housing Development proved futile by broadcast time. Thank you so much for still watching Business Day. We progress with overall economic development as the Zambia Institute for Policy Research Analysts actually are advising government as well as policymakers from a follow-up that they have made in recent research that they have carried out. We are very glad that we did get a chance to speak to Nakuyana Mungomba, who is a research fellow macroeconomics from ZIPA.
Okay, so in our report, what we found was that this actually comes under the second pillar of the ESGP, in which it was planned that they wanted to enhance domestic resource mobilization. So what we actually found in the report was, in assessing this program, was that government had actually done pretty well in parts of this regard. So in terms of automation and modernization of tax collection, for example, that had done very well. And we saw a boost in, say, collection of VAT collections in 2018, which came as high as 140% of what had been anticipated. So that is evidence that the ESGP was working in that regard, and we're encouraging them to continue doing that. But then there's other areas which they had plans on working on, which haven't quite crystallized as yet. So taxing the informal sector, property taxes, which are supposed to be able to bring in more revenue. But in order to do that, you need people to have their land, to have leases for their land before you can actually tax them on property taxes. The ESGP came in after the 2015 crisis, after the economy took a big hit and growth had dropped dramatically. And essentially, that was something out of our control, copper prices collapsing. That was one thing which we could not help. But the thing is, what happened after that? How were we responding to the situation that we found ourselves in? And in terms of our analysis, we found that one aspect of the ESGP is, in Pillar 1, is that there was a desire to restore budget credibility. What we have found is that that has not been restored effectively. So there's good plans which have been laid out, but they haven't been followed through. We're still seeing deviations of 10% in 2018, for example, which when you have laid out a budget, it's not acceptable, shall I say, that you are still having such large deviations, because it threatens your credibility in terms of the people who are observing what you are doing in your country. So with austerity measures, there are aspects in there that speak to the fact that we need to make sure that we are not affecting the vulnerable with the measures that we're taking. But ultimately, austerity measures are about creating a situation of stability. Otherwise, if you continue spending more than you have budgeted, if you continue borrowing more than you are able to pay back, all it does is erode your credibility, and that makes it even harder to stabilize and grow the economy going forward. At the front lines, we're usually talking about education and health, and I stand by, this isn't something we spoke about necessarily in the report, but I stand by the idea that we need to invest in education, and not just education in a basic sense, but actually actively ensuring that we are training our children, our college graduates, to be equipped for the world that they are going to step out into. So here we're talking about focusing our efforts on STEM, so science, technology, and being able to equip the people who are able to do these things to become innovators, to become people who are actually not just making us a country of consumers from outside, but we are inventing and creating things domestically. And not everyone can be a science whiz, not everyone can be a mathematician. So in those regards, we also need to start promoting our technical aspects. So the focus needs to shift as well from just being about education, science, mathematics. For those who cannot do that, you need to be able to work with your hands. You need to be given skills, which, carpentry, mechanics, all these sorts of things, which are sometimes looked down upon, but we need to invest in them to make sure that people are actually taking them on board. Because in the West, for example, these are not jobs which are looked down upon.
Yeah.
These are jobs which, you can make an entire fortune off of. And we need to start changing our mindset in that regard.
You are still tuned in to TV2, the Powers of Television, and this is Business Day. Zambians are being used as fronts to be business owners by foreign nationals who have actually come through and made proposals to most Zambians who have taken this opportunity, or is it an opportunity, in regards to being a front of a certain business, being a CEO, being the founder of this, but when in actual sense, all they're doing is getting some monies, registering this business, while in reality it is being run by foreign nationals. This was revealed recently by Minister of Commerce, Trade and Industry in a parliamentary session. Christopher Yaluma actually did tell the House and the Speaker that this is what's happening to some Zambians on the ground. Let's now engage Donald Chanda, who is a development consultant. He tells us more about what effects this have, what impact this will have, as well as how this might turn out for people who are engaged in this one.
Tell every Zambian, including myself, that globalization is a reality. We are going to do business not only with you and me, between you and me. We are going to do business with the Chinese, we are going to do business with the Americans, we are going to do business with Indians, we're going to do business with British, we're going to do business with South Africans, we're going to do, and we do business like that. But yes, I know, it's also a reality that some people just may receive something, have the name splashed there, but they have nothing. Out there, they were given whatever they were given initially for registration and to facilitate that. That is wrong. That to the Zambians, that is wrong. But I should also warn the investors and the foreigners that that's not the way you do business, because that's not a honest way of doing business. I think let's be honest to each other. We need to develop if an investor wants profit and money, The Zambian equally wants profit and money. Apparently, God didn't make a mistake. He made all of us human beings basically with the same needs. They eat, we eat. They need warmth, we need warmth. So there is no two ways about it. What? The issue is that we Zambians, the large majority of us, do not have the capital for investment. We still need to build up the capital for investment. Capital comes in form of savings. Capital comes in form of, say, buildings. Capital comes in form of owning certain immovable assets and all other things. That's how you build up capital. Capital comes in terms of knowledge and the technological capability that somebody has. That is capital. Capital comes in form of, for instance, government does provide capital in form of infrastructure. Infrastructure, the roads and the railways, that is infrastructure capital. That supports development wheels. Human capital in education, human capital through health services. All that is part of what we Zambians actually need to build up. And of course, the government has its own duty to build up infrastructure, education, and the like. But we also have a part as individuals to do our savings. Spend your money correctly. You see, it should be in each individual to say, every day you wake up, you do have to eat something before you do the next task, okay? And before you go to bed, look at the back of the day. How much have you contributed towards what you have eaten? Every day you must be able to produce a surplus. If you fail to produce a surplus, it means you are eating on what other people are producing. There are several services that can be done. You can wash the cars, you can do A, B, C, D, you can save so many people, and they'll give you a token. You don't work for money and say that I'll have 100% profit. It doesn't work like that. You start in your own way. So I'm even opposed to the many young people, the youth, who say, no, there is no employment around. Do a service somewhere.
All right, so those chats there wrap up our show. Thank you so much for having stayed with us. Join us next week at the same time, Thursday, 19:30, for more business, economic, and entrepreneurship news. On behalf of the entire production team for Business Day, I am Judy Ngulube.